The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, welcome back to Lighting Controls Podcast. We have a very exciting guest who's been with us on the show before. We had a lot of fun the last time, but before we jump in, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes, a news feed, a merch store, training opportunities, and our Council on Lighting Control Startup and Integration if you want to get involved. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode today, the DALI Alliance. If you're unfamiliar with this group, you should check them out, DALI-alliance.org. It's not Dali as in a Salvador Dali, it's DALI Alliance. And additionally, what's really exciting coming up in October 30th to be exact, they have the North American Summit for 2024 for the DALI. And it is going to be a really exciting opportunity. If you're unfamiliar with DALI or you want to up your DALI game, you should check it out. It's in New York City at the Metropolitan Pavilion. It will be October 30th and only October 30th. So you should check out their website. We're going to have a link in the description below if you want to check it out some more. But really big thanks to them for sponsoring this episode. We could not do this without their support. And they really are helping navigate the North American market right now and trying to shift the needle to help really incorporate DALI into projects because it is such a fantastic resource and something that if you are unfamiliar with or new to or just have some maybe old misconceptions about DALI, definitely recommend refreshing your knowledge on DALI by checking them out at dali-alliance.org. But anyways, let's hop into this. So we've got Bruce again. Bruce, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do to those who did not attend the previous episode that you were on?
Yeah, so thanks again for having me back. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation that we had last time. And surprisingly so, because I'm not a lighting controls guy by definition, by pedigree, by training. And so the fact that, even someone like myself was able to jump in and find value for myself and you guys found value, that was pretty exciting. That said, I am a lighting designer slash educator slash consultant slash coach, aka the Lighting Sherpa. For those of you that have met me through that, designed to help carry lighting burdens for people from any spectrum within that space. Primarily, my practice is under the brand Kaleidolight Lighting Design. But I've recently partnered with another lighting design company as we are positioning ourselves to provide a more in-depth concierge level of service to the custom integration channel. That company and our new brand is Illuminated Lighting Design. And we just finished the process of kind of rebranding ourselves and kind of integrating. And we're in the process of working through workflows and process and who's doing what and all that kind of fun stuff. So still very much in the throes of finding a new normal, but excited to continue to expand on what I've sought to do in supporting the custom technology integration community.
Sure. Well, and thank you for coming on again. And you say you don't know much about lighting controls, but I would disagree with that statement. You're a pretty savvy person when it comes to lighting controls. And I would say that the custom integration market is such a unique market in contrast to the commercial and industrial, which I find it so comical. We have C&I and CI. And so exactly. C&I is commercial and industrial, and CI is custom integration. And we're talking about two very different channels and two very different industry halves, which it's so fascinating to look at these through different lenses. And so, in the CI channel, which is where you work, the custom integration channel, you're oftentimes working with lighting controls specialists who operate as integrators, which personally I would love to see a more commonplace in the commercial and industrial side of things. But, from that stance, you were just talking about workflows and really honing how you do your lighting. And so out of curiosity, would you mind like sharing a little bit about the workflow when it comes to lighting controls? What is your procedure from, starting a project, and then when do you really solicit the input of a control specialist or an integrator?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because ultimately it is a question of, how do I find work? What are the channels through which I'm even invited into a project? And then based upon that invitation, how do I navigate moving forward to executing a successful lighting design? Because I'm choosing to focus on the custom integration channel, they often bring me into a project that they've already been hired for or are prospecting for. And part of that, I've asked them on the front end to ask some basic questions that would necessitate the need for a lighting designer. And one of the real basic questions for some of the projects that they're invited into is, who is influencing the lighting decisions on this project? And if they get a bunch of blank stares or a bunch of head scratches and or a bunch of fingers that are kind of pointing across the table, and it's like, oh, here's an opportunity for us to introduce the Lighting Sherpa. We have a third-party lighting designer. There's others like me in the space, and that we can leverage advancing the project to another level. So part of the reason why I think it's created a platform for folks like myself and others to really grow their businesses is that there's a significant gap between traditional lighting designers who are brought in on the project from an architect, an interior designer, those that are kind of driving the design conversation, say, let's also bring in a lighting designer. The caliber of those projects is I think we may have mentioned this last time, at a certain tier and up. And sometimes the integrators will be brought into that conversation, but because of how they've traditionally operated in the space, would be seen as being further downstream. Oh, now we've got the lights. Now we've made some decisions about this. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and put in a home theater, or we're going to put up some TVs, or we're going to have integrated audio in the home. Oh, yeah, we probably need to control the lights. Let's integrate it all, get the integrator in here. We've already made all these selections. Now we're just going to go ahead and give them our load schedule. Go ahead and make sure that you can control this through a centralized, panelized control system and call it a deal. Part of the reason, though, why integrators have stepped into lighting is because they have not had a voice in making those upstream selections in terms of lighting products, especially with the advent of LED, knowing the various protocols and dimming technologies involved, Dolly being one of them. So that's exciting to hear that. Talking about this new concept for people about digital addressability and, this control that is not traditional wiring that, requires how all of the fixtures in a given space can be reconfigured on the back end and not dependent upon how you choose to forecast the wiring on the front end. So then as they're in that space, they're realizing, oh, there's a mismatch between the technology that this product needs to be controlled at and what our controls protocols are. And so then you end up with maybe hard starts, hard stops with lighting. It doesn't dim down far enough because there's a mismatch, or you get flicker, or you get strobing, or even sometimes very imperceptible fluctuations in the power given to the LED fixture that people may not be conscious of, but it does lead to them to feel maybe fatigued or just kind of grumpy. They want to punch the wall and not realizing it's because the lighting is off, It's like, why am I angry? So things like that. So those are my ways in which I'm invited into the project. And the further upstream, as with anything, the better you are able to collaboratively arrive at good solutions that have much better downstream opportunities. Sometimes I'm brought in at the last minute, and they're like, oh, we need to pump the brakes and put the entire project on hold while we address these questions. But it's a mixed bag, but I primarily I'm invited by an integrator for the most part.
Right. So it's really interesting because it is almost the exact opposite direction that the commercial and industrial works. You are being brought in to guide the lighting because the lighting controls person is asking you to help,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to in the commercial and industrial where it's you're the lighting controls guy being brought in by the lighting person to help you guide the lighting controls process.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the CI world, the world
Mm-hmm.
you operate in, the lighting doesn't have as much representation as the controls does. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
in the C and I world, you have less representation of the controls than you do for the lighting. And so it really is this interesting flip of that perspective. So to have you come in because the integrator is saying we need help with the lighting, we already have the controls done. That's a very interesting process. So again, very different from the commercial world. So tell us more a little bit about what that interaction looks like. Are you like handed a lighting control scheme and then you have to match your lighting to it, or like what is the experience here?
Well, that let's just say that question is tugging at a thread that I think has potential to unravel a sweater,
Mm,
because it gets to the question of why is the integrator stepping into the lighting space, right?
Mm.
And that opens up a whole ball of wax so that you start to unpack motivations for why integrators are doing this. Um,
right.
and so, some integrators really do care about lighting outcomes,
Mm,
and they recognize that they need someone who also cares about lighting outcomes and knows specifically how to craft that outcome in favor of a client, right? Others recognize that lighting itself is just another revenue stream, that it's another
Mhm.
product that I can sell, just like my high-end audio, just like my video, just like all the other widgets that go into a technological home. And so the lighting designer can be seen almost as like a salt shaker of cash. You just kind of put a little dash of lighting designer all over the place, and all of a sudden, boom, you have a flavorful meal of financial opportunity for you. And so there's that, and then I think part of it too is they are stepping because they recognize that there is a dynamic here of um, having a sense of knowing controls, having a general maybe sense of lighting, but not being sure to fully step into that space, recognizing that there's a whole world of complexities in terms of just specifications as well as installation and knowing how all of those pieces fit together on the back end that maybe they've never quite considered before, like plenum depth and joist
Mhm.
spacing and insulation versus non-insulation contact for lighting fixtures, all that things that kind of are part and parcel of the fixtures game. Like I just need someone who's confident enough to walk that path to help support me, right? So do I receive a controls plan on the front end and then I do the lighting design based upon that? Not really, unless you just
mm,
consider the electrical plan that they've been handed is what I
Right.
have to work off of, right? Most of the time, they just simply provide controls to the existing electrical set that they've been given. But again, that electrical set is most often created for one purpose only, to
Permit.
pass permitting. That's it,
Yep.
So it's like I kind of take, and I don't mean to disparage New Yorkers when I say this, but I gotta get my little Nicky voice, and I like, you want light, you get light. You get your 6 down lights or your 4 down lights and a fan. Call it a deal. We'll button it up and go on to the next project. And no one's really advocating for asking these kinds of questions, like are those assumptions and those decisions actually delivering the kind of experience that
mm,
a project of this scope and magnitude really deserves, or this client really deserves. And so, I mean, 4 cans in a fan is like a de facto design and intervention. 6 cans
Mhm.
in a fan for a larger space. Maybe if you're a big spender, you have 4 cans in a shan, is what I call it, where you have
and
a
a chance.
chandelier in the middle or a pendant. Yeah, you got your 4 cans in the shan, your 4 cans in the fan, bada bing, bada boom, there you go. And so then a lot of these guys are brought in with a certain level of just doing controls and
Yep.
never asking questions on, is this wired correctly? Are these in the proper location? Has anyone asked the question of ceiling heights, reflectances of surfaces, any other kind of architectural configurations in the space, or things that will align more with the client's lifestyle? So as I'm invited in and they're thinking maybe dollars, 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 I'm thinking, okay, if that's what gets me through the door, I can then use that as a platform to start talking to clients that may not otherwise have access to a design professional about things that matter to me, about those questions of what is the experience that you want to have in the space? Um, do you even have any eye issues that no one's ever bothered to ask you before?
Mm.
How tall are you? How old are you? Those have impacts into the lighting decisions that we make that controls can bring into full focus. And then when just kind of a subtle plug, I just did a podcast last week for Cedia with Walt Zerby. If anyone's worked with him before, if you know him at all from that space, he does a lot of standards and controls and hosts a podcast. We talk about human-centric lighting, circadian
Mhm.
lighting, and that's a big buzz term in the custom integration world as well, that you can truly only accomplish with a sophisticated controls protocol. And so that opens up a whole nother door of opportunity for custom integrators to step into, that goes beyond wall switches. It goes to truly
Mhm.
establishing sequences of operations and scenes and automations that support a higher level of experience in the space than just simply turning on and off lights.
So, having recently been brought in on a high-end residential project, I was paying attention after our last conversation to a
Oh,
certain few things, right? And so I'm very curious if this is typical because it feels like it is to me. We talk about the integrator being involved prior to the lighting designer many times, right? Because, like you said, the permit set is issued, and it's exactly that. It's for permit only. So the architect finishes that thing, the owner and the architect maybe have some conversations about lighting, maybe. And then
mhm,
the GC gets brought on board, who brings on his electrician. And it seems
mhm,
to me like the electrician and the integrator go hand in hand because the electrician has the integrator that he prefers to work with, that he knows they can work cohesively and get the job done effectively. And then it seems like that's where those some of those other conversations then come up with the owner about wanting specific needs, and then depending on the integrator, needing a lighting designer like yourself to come in and really kind of help fill the gaps for them and show them the way. And is that typical for the way that goes? Is that why we see the integrator involved prior to the lighting designer?
um, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would say that's the reason why. Um, if the integrator is even brought in, sometimes they're just brought in for controls, or they're just brought in for TVs, or just brought in for audio. I think because the integrator, being a technology professional, represents so many different subsets of a technological home. Any one of those could be a pathway, right? And
Mhm.
I think within certain segments of the custom integration industry's conversation, they're trying to invert the entire conversation around to, instead of leading with all of these other technology pieces, they'll lead with lighting, because more projects will need lighting than need, an 85-inch high definition OLED television set on the wall. Everybody's going to need lighting. So if they can establish their market viability through lighting, oh, then by the way, we do all these other technological things, right?
Mm.
Mm.
So there's that kind of value proposition that I find. Um, and I wish that I could say that a lot of electricians and integrators truly do go hand in hand, but from a lot of stories that I've heard from folks, there's somewhat of an adversarial dynamic
Mm.
there,
Mm.
because typically for a lot of residential projects, because no one is advocating for the lighting outcomes, it falls to the guy that has the high voltage, line voltage
Yep.
contract. And
Yep.
so what they're going to do is go to their electrical distributor and say, I've got 60 holes, I need 60 cans. And when they say cans, they don't actually mean cans. They actually
Right.
mean what I call an unholy communion lighting wafer. Like the devil's spawn. And I only say that because not all of them are horrible, but when you actually think about the light that's being put out from those things, you recognize it's actually, I use the term, it's actually adversarial lighting that's like
Mm.
shooting these glare daggers in people's faces. And again, not to be violent, like fists emerging from the ceiling, just beating people down because you have all this brightness over your head and none of it actually gets down to the surface and it's all like right in your face. And
Mm.
because no one's actually curated that particular LED, it's high in the blue, and with just a little bit of the doping of the golden. What's the word that they use for that? Um, the actual cover over the blue LED is
The
a
phosphor.
composition. That's it, phosphor
Oh, okay, yeah.
or sulfur. What'd you say?
Phosphor.
Whatever that is. Yeah, phosphor. The phosphor. I'm sorry. So to produce the white light, but we're not actually asking, is the quality of that sufficient to give us what we need?
Yeah.
So not only do we not have bright enough light for doing our daily tasks, but then the overall quality of that is horrible. There's no actual. It's just boom. It's like a big ball. If you ever look at any photometric of a standard contractor pack downlight, it's just a big ball like that sun over Webster's shoulder. Like that's it. But then down below it's just dark and the horrible color rendering doesn't dim very
Yeah.
well. But man, these guys buy it like it's going out of style because
Mm-hmm.
all you have to do is just do your rotozip in the ceiling, just pop the thing in. Don't have to worry about joists. Don't have to worry about plumbing. Don't have to worry about HVAC. Just in and out, just like that, like a jackrabbit. And so for those guys, when you're providing a product that's more specification grade, it's like, whoa, I have to spend that much more time with a much more complicated
Mm-hmm.
piece of hardware,
Mhm.
and it's got multiple components that I have to keep track of, and it's
Yep.
heavy on my shoulders to install 60, boxes that have these drivers inside, and I've got joist hangers, and I've got all this other kind of stuff that I have to worry about. And then you make my life even more difficult by having this upstart lighting designer with all these fantastic ideas that just add even more time to my scope and schedule and more loads and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's adversarial in that regard.
Mm.
Um, but I think once you can do a value proposition to help them recognize that there is a mediated space within the context of margin on the products that are going in the projects, especially since they're higher end, you help this
Mm-hmm.
guy bring him in as an ally. That's how a lot of integrators are approaching electrical contractors, guiding them into that space. But I think it also pivoting does require a certain degree of interviewing to find out, is this a D level electrical contractor, C
Mm.
level, B level, A level? Because depending on what they can actually bring, you might be setting them up for failure and frustration
Mm-hmm.
by asking them to do something that is beyond what their level of interest in doing their job is. So,
Well, and I think what's really interesting about that dynamic is again, we have similar terms but different definitions for these
sure.
things. Like
Mm.
integrator, for instance, integrator in the commercial world oftentimes I mean, there's definitely like systems integrators that do HVAC and building automation integration, but when we're talking about lighting, a lighting integrator is a specialist who focuses on just lighting, whereas in the CI channel, the integrator is actually most of the time going to be doing AV type stuff, IT
Yeah.
potentially, on top of the lighting controls. And
Mhm.
so the lighting controls may be an added package that they
Mm.
do, but it's not going to be their sole source of work
Mhm.
on the project. And so with that in mind, having this added thing, it does kind of become this menu option as opposed to we need a lighting specialist to help us with this. It's okay, can you also do lighting? Can you also do lighting
Mhm.
controls? Um, and so on that front, there's sort of this weird dynamic that comes of that because of the fact that the project may have been started with the integrator because they were doing the video or the audio equipment. And then it's, oh, you can also do the lighting controls? Great, do the lighting controls for us. And so it does kind of seem like this a la carte approach rather than really dialing into what you need at the start and then having the team and moving forward, which does seem to be more of how the commercial world works. But rather it's more of like, okay, we also need this. Oh, we need this too. Oh, we need this too. And it just kind of extends that project in a different format. And so, when it comes to these dynamics with the contractors and the integrators and the lighting controls, I imagine there's also a little bit of friction there too, to a degree. I mean, what if the contractor could provide all the lighting controls? Then the integrator might not be retained for that service. And so I'm curious, what that looks like, similarly to what you were just talking about with the lighting world, because I would imagine that kind of dynamic has, to a degree, been smoothed out because a lot of these integrators have been doing lighting controls for a lot longer than they've been doing lighting fixtures.
Yeah. All good questions. I would say, on some levels, it kind of depends on the scope of work. And I agree that as the conversation within the integration channel is evolving and the value proposition is becoming a little bit more secure for them, then they are able to not approach us in an ad hoc way, but just say, here's the full suite of services. One of the evidences that I find about that is how, I don't know if you've ever heard of a group called the Home, I think it's the Home Technology Association, HTA. They actually, HTA is within the custom integration community to help establish certain benchmarks. I'm sure that you see it in the control side of things. Certain benchmarks are like, yeah, I do it. I do lighting controls. Yeah, check me out. Can play with the controls. You're like, I don't know if it's going to do what you say it's going to do. The reputation of that guy Webster. I tell you what, you want to stay away from that guy, right? Webster, he's top class. Penumbra controls, man. Yeah, we're all about that. Either way, so HTA is establishing more of a peer and market-based review to help integrators differentiate themselves and say, this person doesn't just present themselves as doing certain things. They actually have demonstrable value within their market. And so when they have that designation, that certification, that they've undergone that rigorous kind of vetting process and they can handle certain scales of projects that have certain levels of complexity. All the way up to what's the highest one? I don't know it off the top of my head. Let's just say estate, I think, is like the highest one. But within that platform, they're really trying to advance these technology individuals as technology designers, right? Using the language of design around technology, which is important. And one of the things that they've included within that conversation is what they call like a calculator, where it's kind of like a simple little flow chart, answer yes or no questions, provide some basic details. So you can pre-qualify a project to see if this is something to move forward with as an integrator or not. And included within that list is lighting now. They've just added that to it to say, what square footage do you think you need lighting? Do you need level A, B, or C fixtures? Are you going to have lighting shades in addition to lighting controls? Because that having a centralized lighting control solution is an investment, and I think there's still a lot of people that have a mentality of just thinking about, if I have 6 loads of lighting in this room, I need to have 6 switches and I have to go through all of them to figure out what's what. And the integrators can simplify that. So that's something where they're trying to present it as a unified piece of service that they can offer to their clients. Along with that, part of the other aspect of that question that I think is interesting to identify is the notion of legacy, right? In terms of solution that you come up with. So, for example, I will name drop, but I'm not advocating for anything. It's just pops into the top of my head. So, if I have a Crestron system today, and you're an integrator that provides support on a Crestron system today, what if you decide to move out of my market tomorrow? or
Mhm.
what a restaurant decides to stop supporting this version of the system that was installed 5 years ago because it's no longer viable to the market. Similar to what we see sometimes with software upgrades, or, well, I've got to get a new laptop because my operating system can't handle that new widget software that I had before. So people are having to think about future proofing these solutions. That's an additional consideration. That's an additional stress, and is that worth the investment just on the control side, let alone moving forward with lighting fixtures themselves? So there's a lot of layers to it, and it's
Yeah.
each one of them requires a little bit of tap dancing to figure out what's the best path to achieve a desired outcome.
Hmm. Well, and I think it's really another interesting facet that they have these sorts of certification requirements because, in a lot of ways, these integrators are being asked to be catch-alls
Yeah.
for scope that's not otherwise being covered. And so
Mhm.
it is sort of like you need some way of verifying, okay, is this group up to the expectations that are being delivered. So I think ultimately having these is a really great support for that. And I think the other thing is that it's evolved out of a need because
Mhm.
otherwise it is sort of that friction pushback that happens where, well, why are you doing it? Why can't I do it? And additionally, it's different in that regard as well because um, integrators in the CI channel, very much like integrators in the commercial channel, are third parties. And so
Mhm.
they are able to compete in the same territory, which means that there could be a whole lot of mudslinging rather
Mhm.
than, okay, yeah, this is much better for you than it is for me. So why don't you do this project or something
Mhm.
along that collaborative line? But, from your vantage point, when you get pulled in, I mean, do you see a lot of these like elements that get brought up for the purposes of these certifications? Do you see like them leveraging those certifications for the purpose of the job, or is it really more of a preemptive safeguard that's being used rather than a after the fact sort of thing?
Yeah, I think as different individuals evolve within the space, they see the value of making those investments. Could be preemptive. It could also just be a sense of them wanting to, um, just demonstrate that ongoing confidence that they have for potential future work and whatnot. Um, and then I think as individuals up that chain of capability, so clients that are the high value clients, right, are going to be more discerning to find out, okay, I have a lot of money to invest in this dream project. I want to make sure that I bring the right group of professionals together that have the necessary certifications, and so that's going to be one of those things that I'll use as a pre-qualifier to even invite someone to the table. So, for example, using the Crestron, oh, this is a Crestron diamond dealer. They're not just bronze or rust. They're high value dealers in Crestron. I'm only going to choose diamond dealers because the scope of my project requires that, or whatnot. Um, and I think that's helpful for them to help to differentiate in those ways. But I think as you have any market that has a certain level of penetration and saturation, you want to find ways that you can differentiate when push comes to shove.
Mhm.
The other thing I would say too, kind of circling back to this notion of the certification as well as the legacy idea, is that integrators recognize that when all of these pieces of a home um, are connected to one another, it goes farther beyond just installing a product. Now you have to
Mm-hmm.
support that product for the lifetime of that product. If there are updates, if something happens where a light all of a sudden doesn't work, well, who's the first person they're going to call? They're going to call the lighting designer and say, "Hey, this light that you designed for my house doesn't work." Are they going to call the electrical contractor and say, "Hey, yeah, this light that you installed, it doesn't work"? No, they're going to call the integrator and say, "Hey, yeah, this light you're supposed to control isn't able to be controlled." So for a lot of them, I've had an integrator tell me once they sign the contract, it's like, okay, now we're married. Now we're going to have a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year relationship with you to help
Yep.
provide ongoing support, updates, upgrades, making sure that this technological infrastructure continues to serve your needs in the long term. And so that's a value that they bring to the conversation that helps, I think, to make my life easier, and them saying, okay, we are going to be invested in this project for a long time. You recognize that with LED technologies, these are technologies that aren't like just changing out a light bulb if it doesn't go out. You actually have to plan a 10-year forecasting of this technology that I know you're not going to be replacing anytime soon. So we want to make sure that we give you the best possible solution within your budget to keep delivering for the long term of that thing, right? So a lot of those factors, I think, weigh into the certification process and weigh into these other elements of what they bring to the conversation.
So speaking of that marriage, so in a lot of the commercial projects, right, a lot of the stuff, once it goes in, it's there for the next 10, 15, 20 years until the room is upgraded again, right? Things don't change too much. When we get into this space, not as much the lighting, but when you start getting into the AV, right, TVs, the audio, that's the type of stuff that every few years is being upgraded. You're talking about, doing the updates for the client and taking care of that. So how often do you see that equipment changeover where, okay, we're changing this TV, but now this legacy equipment doesn't control this TV, so we need to update this piece, but then we still need to make sure it works with all the other legacy gear that's here. So how does that work for the integrators? And then how often is that sort of cycle in I guess in your world?
I haven't been a part of the conversation long enough to be involved in that kind of discussion. But that is a discussion that does happen, especially with integrators that have clients for a good long period of time. And that's really more outside of my scope of what I do as a lighting designer. So I'm not privy to it, but there have been projects where I have been brought in where I'm being brought in because they had, old MR16 lamps that you can't buy in the market anymore. And,
Yep.
you can't use an old rheostat the way you used to. There's an integrator in Hawaii that sent me a photograph of what looks like a cove lighting, but it's like a series of, they look like a whole end-to-end line of those old tubed halogen lights that you would put in those college lamps that would shine on your ceiling. But it's like a bunch of sausages of those things set all end to end in a cove. I'm like, what is that? When I looked at it, man, that's way beyond my time that I've been in this game. Like, oh, you could just replace that with a simple linear LED with a nice diffuser that angles the light into the space. You don't need to have all that extra hardware. But again, like some of those upgrade projects that they're being brought into have those kinds of solutions that provide an opportunity to say, have you heard about LED technologies? Maybe something to look into.
I just want to take a second to thank you for basically saying that's outside my scope, that's outside my experience. I don't know much about that. I can kind of extrapolate because it's refreshing where a lot of time in any part of the lighting industry, somebody might inflate their own knowledge and ego and experience. And so it's really refreshing to have somebody say, no, that's actually, I don't really deal with that a lot. And so I really just, I want to take a moment to thank you for that, because that really is a nice thing to hear every now and then. It's like, yeah, no, it's not really my thing.
And to that end, I'm still wondering why I'm even a part of this. But I'm still not a lighting controls guy. But this is so fun. It's still engaging. I'm so glad you're finding value in this. So I definitely am.
I ask that question myself every stinking day. Anyways, we're almost out of time here, so I want to wrap this up because I know it goes by so fast, but really good stuff. So from your vantage point in the CI channel, which is we're primarily talking about residential projects, lighting designers are not really a part of the part and parcel, the team for the most part. They're either an after the fact thought, or they're not even a part of the process, and somebody else has to do that. It's almost sounds like nose goes kind of approach, where it's like, okay, well, you're stuck with it. You got to deal with the lighting, and so having somebody who's willing to kind of dive into the residential world as somebody who's like, yes, I will give guidance to those looking for guidance on lighting, really does give you a good vantage point to see this industry in a way, because it feels like such a shadow world to the commercial side of things, where, because again, everything is so different. There's such
Mhm.
a flip to the process. And so
Mhm.
lighting controls are basically a guaranteed on a lot of these projects, because the
Mhm.
integrator is involved, or there's conversations about it, like, okay, how are we going to control the lights? What are the switches going to look like? Which brand are we going with? Those conversations happen a lot sooner than the lighting, and the lighting happens after the lighting controls conversations happen for the
Mhm.
most part.
Mhm.
And so that really does still create the same paradox that we have in the commercial world, which is
Mhm.
mismatch of luminaire communication lines, poor
Yep.
dimming performance,
Mhm.
bad experiences with lighting in general. And so, yes, you might be a super skilled integrator doing lighting controls all the time, really savvy at it. But if you don't understand lighting, providing lighting is still an uphill battle, similarly to how a lighting designer in the commercial world providing controls
Mhm.
is an uphill battle, because
Mhm.
they're two sides of the same equation, but they both require a huge amount of knowledge to really support and be there for. And just as we're seeing the residential world evolving into embracing lighting design a little bit more and more, and having experts, you're kind of treading the same ground that I'm treading, but in the residential side, whereas I'm treading in the commercial side, which is, you
Mhm.
know, there is benefit to having somebody who knows what they're talking about regarding this system. For you,
Yeah.
lighting; for me, controls. But
Mm.
Yeah.
the question is, where does that support for that role come from? Who's paying the bills of that person being involved? And so for your side, the integrators really see a lot of benefit from hiring somebody like you, or at least retaining your
Mhm.
services, because you can give them guidance on something they could then make money off of. The goal
Yeah.
here is, okay, we're going to sell fixtures, we're going to install fixtures. That's going to be a revenue stream for us. But
Mhm.
because they're so unfamiliar with lighting in general, and they're just focused on the control side, they do need that guidance. And similarly on the commercial side, it's again the opposite side of the same coin, where, okay, I know how to do lighting, I can do lighting all day long, but when it starts to get into controls, it's like, whoa, I have no idea what you're talking about. And
Mhm.
so just finding this way of having both covered is really critical, because it's not
Yeah.
enough to just say we've got lighting, or not enough to just say we've got controls. You need to have both, and both backed by expert knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
People who really know what they're talking about, people who really are in the weeds, understanding everything. And so in the CI channel, there's a lot of safeguards for controls, but there's not as much safeguard for lighting yet.
Mhm. All good stuff. I think for me, if I can respond to
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
really, I think an operating principle that I always try to bring to the conversation is really um, just looking at it through the lens of value. What's the
Mm,
what's the value that you can contribute to this? And if you feel that there is value in the contribution, then there should be some remuneration, right? Yeah, go ahead, pay me for the value that you think I bring. And I think for me, as I continue to talk with dealers, it's like, yeah, fixtures, yeah, okay, yeah, that's fine. But as we alluded to last time, what is this fixture doing? How is this fixture
Mm.
contributing to the overall value of the project? And whenever I'm brought in and the client is like, well, I paid you, or I hired you, do we really need that integrator? He seems kind of pushy, or whatnot. Or if they're talking with the lighting designer, yeah, lighting designer, like you could handle this on the commercial project, right? Yeah, I mean, like we just need it really simple. We don't need all the sophisticated lighting controls. We don't really need to bring penumbra in on this, or we don't need to bring Ron in on this, do we? It's like if those questions are being asked, I really try myself to let them understand that because lighting is in its fullest extent um, trying to create a simulacrum of the the natural environment, the dynamic qualities of the sun, the dynamic qualities where there's color changing, there's intensity that's changing, there's a duration, there's a distribution, there's all these different elements of how we experience light inherently as human beings. The only way that you can get this light to do that is through a sophisticated application of controls. And so I want people, whenever I have an opportunity to give a value proposition, the proposition is this: think of this as a lighting solution, and that you cannot separate the light from the control of that light. They must be seen as one and the same. And so I always tell them the experience is always going to be better when there's an integrated collaboration between the control specialist and the lighting designer. And we haven't talked about this, but there's the part where a lot of integrators, again, by ad hoc, I'll raise my hand and say that we can do that. They're being brought in to do a lot of automated shades. And so now you're talking about daylighting controls and those mechanisms, electric lighting controls and those mechanisms, all of those integrated into a total solution for a given project. That's a pretty powerful value proposition that you can say, here's a full lighting solution that we can present to you. I'm hopeful that for folks that find themselves like knocking on the door from a control side saying, hey, I can bring value, to have an inside person advocating for that value that they know that you can clearly bring, can continue to help that conversation evolve, so that it becomes a de facto piece of the conversation early on to say, okay, we got this box checked, this box checked. Hey, where's the controls professional? We need to get them on board right now. That takes time. And so for me, I see myself still on the emergent part of this, what I call a battle overall, to really help raise the overall conversation around lighting outcomes that you can only truly have when you marry those elements together.
Great stuff, Bruce. Great stuff. It's funny. Residential is so different from commercial, right? Lighting truly is art. And when you get into residential, every homeowner is different. What they want, what they need, how they perceive color, temperature, everything, right? Every job is truly, truly unique. And I know we could say the same about commercial, but it's not the same. Everyone lights a gym the same way, right? Not everyone lights their bedroom or their living room the same way. And you get into these conversations about control with some of these guys, and you have these conversations with the owner, and they say, hey, we want this sunset look that's going to be a 30-minute timeline, and it's going to do this. And you start talking about, can your control system actually do this? Or do we need to marry these two systems together? You maintain the front end, controls will be over here for these specific things, right? And it's just, it's so important to dive into those conversations. And if you're putting together your home, whether it's a high-end residence or not, consider all of these little things. Take into account all the little stuff like, do I want LEDs under the lips of my stairs so I don't have to turn on all the lights at night? The answer is yes, you do. The answer is yes, you do. There's just so many little things.
Can I afford to run all that wiring and do all the install into the treads? Or do I just need to have a series of step lights that I can just put in little junction boxes on the sides of the wall? Yeah, okay. Let's play this out. But yeah, absolutely. You do need to have that light at nighttime.
Yep. But the most important thing, the biggest takeaway here is get rid of the wafer lights. If you're putting in new construction, do not put in wafer lights. They have their place in retrofits. They absolutely have their place when you have no height. But if you're in new construction, do not do it. That is probably the biggest takeaway here.
Oh gosh, then you haven't been paying attention. I know I have strong feelings about the wafer lights. It's emerged from the ceiling plan punching you in the eyeball. But yeah, I would say be discerning. If you have to do a wafer, be discerning. Find a good quality wafer, and use them sparingly, only as needed. So anyway, but awesome. Yeah, I hope that let people not take that home with them. I want them to take home some of the more salient messages of coming together, providing value as a team.
Definitely.
That is important. Bruce, thank you again as always. Really appreciate your time. Fantastic conversation. I hope our listeners get as much joy out of this as we do in this conversation. So thank you again. I will just take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. We've got all of our episodes and a bunch of other great stuff there if you have not checked it out. But also, huge thank you to our sponsor for this episode, the Dolly Alliance. If you have not seen our episode 44, Demystifying Dolly, you should check it out. Whether you are a Dolly Pro or new to Dolly, it is a great conversation with Paul Drawson. Really great information about Dolly. There's a lot going on in the Dolly world. You should check them out, dollyalliance.org, Dolly, DALI-alliance.org. And additionally, if you're not signed up for it and you want to learn more about Dolly, you should check out the Dolly North American Summit for 2024, happening October 30th at the Metropolitan Pavilion in New York City. Registration's available online. You should check it out. It's going to be a really interesting event. I will be there for sure, and I highly recommend anybody else interested in learning more about Dolly to check it out. But until then, thank you so much for joining us here. And Bruce, again, thank you for joining us. It's an awesome conversation.